Massacres are never clean. But the lifeless bodies here, father, mother, and child alike, with no visible wounds, evidence that this was an attack of a different kind.
There was a lot of smoke and there was a smell. It was very difficult to breathe. We couldn't breathe anymore.
Women were dying in their homes, in the streets in front of their homes. Some people had traces of blood coming out of their mouth.
Activists and local health workers say a noxious substance was dropped by the Syrian regime on an area of Khan Sheikhoun in Idlib province. The regime denies carrying out the attack, but its ally Russia says otherwise.
The Syrian aviation launched a strike on a large terrorist ammunition depot and a concentration of military hardware on the eastern outskirts of the town of Khan Sheikhoun. On the territory of this depot were workshops which produced chemical warfare munitions.
The visual evidence of the attack is difficult to reconcile with that account. The loss of innocent people is indisputable in what is being described as the worst of war crimes, and yet something that has happened before.
If we fail to act, the Assad regime will see no reason to stop using chemical weapons. As the ban against these weapons erodes, other tyrants will have no reason to think twice about acquiring poison gas and using them.
A prescient warning and an empty threat. The red line that former US President Barack Obama drew over the chemical attack in a Damascus suburb in 2013 would soon fade. Instead, the Assad regime was bolstered by Russia's military intervention and continued using indiscriminate warfare against rebels and civilians alike. By some estimates, dropping 13,000 barrel bombs in 2016 alone.
Any use of chemical weapons anywhere constitutes a threat to international peace and security and is a serious violation of international law.
But it's chemical weapons attacks that have spurred the international community to greater action, with few results.
The 15th meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
The UN Security Council has met to discuss this latest incident.
Will we take action?
And while there are calls for those responsible to be held to account, what's to be expected in a conflict where war crimes go unpunished? Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Dr. Mohamed Katoub in Gaziantep in southern Turkey. He's the Advocacy Director at the Syrian American Medical Society. And in the UK, Marijn Nieuwenhuis. He's a political geographer who specializes in the effects of chemical weapons at the University of Warwick. And from London, Alexander Nekrasov. He's a former advisor of the Kremlin. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Mohamed Katoub, let me start with you. Was it clear to you that this was sarin gas?
Well, actually, we as medical worker can describe the symptoms, which is indicative to usage of phosphorus compounds. So we cannot identify sarin itself, but it's the group of sarin. This is what the symptoms that our doctors witnessed on their patients.
Alexander Nekrasov, the Russians are saying that this was a rebel Al-Qaeda stock. It was bombed, yes, by the Syrians, but that it was the rebel stock that released these gases. Is that the way you see it?
Well, that's what the Russian Defense Ministry said. But I would like to ask one thing only. And who benefits from this use of chemical weapons? And unfortunately, the answer is the rebels. Because why would the Assad regime use chemical weapons at this delicate situation when the talks are on about the political solution, when the Syrian army is basically achieving its aims? What would be the point of using chemical weapons?
Okay, but Mr. Nekrasov, I've heard this argument before when 9/11 happened. People say, who benefits? It's the people who want to invade Iraq. So maybe George Bush did it to himself. I mean, we can use this argument over and over. Let's try to stick to this attack for the moment and try to understand who might have done it, right? Do you think it's possible, Mr. Nekrasov, that the Syrians bombed their people with chemical weapons as they did in the past in Ghouta, in Khan al-Assal and elsewhere?
Well, I don't see any point in doing that for the Syrian regime, simply because it doesn't make sense. What I do see is that the finger of blame was pointed at the Syrian regime at once. Nobody tested anything. You know, it was immediate. Okay. On the 4th, we see that film appearing, and immediately Western politicians and others are saying, that's it. We've got evidence that it was the Syrian regime.
Okay.
I don't understand how that works.
Okay, it's not just Western politicians. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the attack was a crime against humanity that could derail the fragile Syrian peace process. François Hollande has called for an international response. The US and so on have also done that. They're discussing it at the Security Council. Maren Nieuwenhuis, let's talk to the man who understands these weapons the best out of all of us in this discussion. Is it possible that the Syrians could have hit an Al-Qaeda depot and somehow those gases could have floated out and killed all those people? Is that theory plausible, Mare?
Well, that is very difficult for me to say. I mean, first there has to be forensic analysis done on site with biological samples. This is a very difficult question, very politically tense, so I can't give you a conclusive answer. My research mainly focuses on the exceptionality of chemical weapons, why it is that chemical weapons receive the attention they receive at the moment.
Okay, so let me then ask you what Alexander Nekrasov posed. Why would the Syrians use chemical weapons against those people in Idlib? Tell me why chemical weapons are used as they have been used throughout history. They've been used by Saddam Hussein in Iraq and so on. The Syrians have used them. They've used sarin gas. They've used chlorine. Why would you use chemical weapons?
That is, I think, the key question here. And in order to understand that, we have to first understand what a chemical weapon is, what gassing actually does. It is rather different than conventional weaponry in the sense that it uses the environment, in this case the atmosphere, the air, against the breather himself or herself. So the air becomes a weapon. Rather than you relying on a pistol or a gun, you use the air as an extended battlefield against the breather. Now, in terms of lethality, if you look at it quantitatively at the numbers, you will immediately see throughout the 20th century that the number of casualties from gas warfare has been minimal compared at least and especially to the attention gas weapons and gas attacks have received throughout the 20th century, up from the moment of the First World War up until yesterday, really. So there is a discrepancy between the lethality and the representation of gas weapons. And it is exactly that lethality can only be explained by understanding what chemical weapons do. They take away your breath. Literally, quite literally, take away your breath. The German thinker Peter Sloterdijk uses the term atmoterrorism or atmospheric terrorism because nothing is as scary and as frightening, as terrifying as the taking away of one's breath. And so it has largely psychological effects. It has.
Yes, and of course the pictures are absolutely horrendous. Mohamed Katoub, is it absolutely certain to you that Bashar al-Assad did this, that the Syrian army did this?
Well, we have been calling for investigation on the attacks on using unconventional weapons in Syria since a long time as medical workers and humanitarian workers in Syria. This is not the first time. This is not the 100th time. This is since August 2013 when the Ghouta massacre happened. This over 140 chemical attacks happened in Syria, and the joint investigation mechanism confirmed that 4 of those attacks were done by the Syrian regime. So we are calling to stop those attacks. If it's the Syrian regime or other parties are doing this, we noticed an increase in the usage of chemical weapons last 10 days. We received a barrel by a helicopter, barrel loaded with chemical gas, in one of our hospitals, and a doctor died on March 25th, just 10 days ago. Who's flying over Syria? Who's using helicopters over Syria? This is the question which have to be answered here. Why investigators are not allowed to go to the locations where those chemical weapons have been thrown on? Till now, there is no reaction from the international community to stop those attacks, whether it's Bashar al-Assad or other people. Witnesses on the ground reported that a military jet implemented the attack on Khan Sheikhoun yesterday. And who owned the military jets? Who's flying over Syria? This is a well-known answer.
Right, the rebels don't have aircraft. Alexander Nekrasov, I know you're skeptical, but let me just give you this quote from Rex Tillerson, the US Secretary of State. It is clear that this is how Bashar al-Assad operates, with brutal, unabashed barbarism. And then the US saying at the UN Security Council special meeting that the Russian claims do not comport with reality. Let me put it to you this way, Mr. Nekrasov. If it can be categorically proved that the Syrian regime did this and they used chemical weapons on their people, this is putting Moscow in a tricky position, right? Because at some point, they're going to have to distance themselves from Assad, aren't they?
Well, you're asking a hypothetical question, because if it is proved, now nothing has been proved, no evidence has been shown. Rex Tillerson may have made a statement. I actually saw the statement and read it. It's not as tough as somebody might want to perceive.
I just read you a direct quote from the statement, sir.
No, I know. I'm just telling you. Rex Tillerson is flying to Moscow on the 11th to talk about Syria. So we'll see what happens out of that. But I don't understand a situation when accusations are made immediately after an attack. Your expert has told us just now that he needs samples, he needs to look at the specifics. How come all these politicians suddenly, without any evidence, are showing the finger of blame? And
so
by the way,
how about the track record?
Last month in the United Nations, Russia and China have offered a resolution that all sides will report every use of chemical weapons when it comes to rebels, non-governmental groups, and so on.
Okay.
And guess what?
Allow me to come in there for a second. So let's look at Syria's track record here, right? Every time there was a chemical attack in the past, whether that was Ghouta or Khan al-Assad or any other of numerous chemical attacks in the past, they've always said, Mr. Nekrasov, that they didn't do it. They've often said that the rebels did it to themselves. Then why did we have to go through this whole process of the Russians getting involved, of the OPCW, of the Syrians handing over their chemical weapons? Why did we have to go through this whole rigmarole if they never had chemical weapons? So they're saying the same thing that they said in the past, but there was an implicit and direct even admission when they got involved with handing over their weapons. Isn't the same going to happen now? This is their track record. They never claim responsibility, Mr. Nekrasov.
Well, the rebels never accept that they have been using chemical weapons, and the Russian military have been showing proof that they have chemical weapons, that they did use them. So this is, this leads us nowhere. My question still stands. Why would the Syrian government use chemical weapons now when it is winning the war? That makes no point. It makes no sense.
Maybe because there's no pressure on them. Have you considered that?
But why would they cause problems for themselves when they are winning, when the political process
Why would you kill 400,000 people in a war? I don't know the answers to these, but you're sort of, you tell me I'm posing hypotheticals. Aren't you posing hypotheticals here, sir?
400,000 people, you are saying, were killed from both sides. You can't just say Assad.
Actually, the best available estimates show that Assad has done the vast majority of the killing of those 400,000.
Unfortunately, we saw what the so-called moderate rebels are doing and how they're killing people. And unfortunately, I need to tell you something else.
Sure.
When I saw the footage of these so-called moderate rebels killing children and women, beheading some of them, are you going to tell me that I would need to believe these people who are committing such horrific crimes that suddenly they're all victims.
No, but can't we separate them out? We can say there's Daesh, we can say there's Nusra or Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, there's FSA. We separate these out. People go and look at them and we judge them by their actions. You're saying all of them are so-called moderates, so you're calling all of them terrorists.
You know, when I have doubts, when this terrible thing happened, right? Everybody suddenly said it's Assad. No proof, nobody went to check anything. I'm sorry, that doesn't work like this in the real world. You can't put the blame on somebody without any proof at all.
Mohamed Katoub, okay, Alexander Nekrasov. Mohamed Katoub, is this going to change the direction of the war or change at least the way people perceive the war, or is anybody going to do anything about it at the UN or do anything different?
Previously, three UN Security Council resolutions were adopted condemning the usage of chemical weapons inside Syria. The third one was to create the joint investigation mechanism. A report was released last October confirming the usage of chemical weapons by the Syrian regime. Nothing happened. This is the results of the absence of accountability in the country. Now the escalation of usage of chemical weapons was accompanied by attacks on the health facilities responding to the treatment for those patients, which is a strategy was used by the Syrian regime since the beginning of the war. Attacks the facilities, treating the people, saving lives inside the country. The impact of this escalation is horror inside the country, horror between the people. One of our doctors called and we were just trying to calm them. He said, I want a mask. I want to continue what I'm doing. The doctor who died on March 25th, he died in the operation room. Now tell me that this was not a hospital. Tell me that this was not a helicopter dropped the param. This was our hospital. This was our doctor who was killed by a barrel bomb loaded with chemical weapon. So what's the impacts now is more horror in the country. No one is stopping those attacks. Escalation in violence in the country. Accountability and justice is the only thing that might stop all of this. And I don't see one of the Syrian government or its allies calling for justice and accountability.
Okay, Mohamed Katoub, Marijn Nieuwenhuis, and Alexander Nekrasov. Gentlemen, I appreciate you all taking the time to talk to us. Thanks so much.